Welcome to Coffee with Joe for Friday, February 11th, 2011. Joe,
Pete?
let's talk about inflation and monetary reform. We've been doing some videos about the NEED Act that Dennis Kucinich submitted in the end of the lame duck Congress, H6550. One of the aspects of the NEED Act, one of the goals of the NEED Act, is to retire the U.S. federal debt, the
Right.
government debt, right? Which
Yep.
stands at somewhere north of $14 trillion. It's in the news because on March 1st, Congress is going to have to raise the debt ceiling one more time so we can take on even more debt. But H6550 is all about creating a debt-free money system, and one of the benefits of that, if it can actually work, is to retire the U.S. debt as it comes due and pay it off with debt-free money issued by the U.S. Treasury.
Right.
But the most common criticism we hear, and we even did a video on this a year or so ago, but we're taking another stab at it because it's comes up so often, is that
Yeah.
that would be inflationary. A debt-free money system would be inflationary. The paying off of the national debt would be inflationary. I can see where that argument comes from. The U.S. debt, $14 trillion. The U.S. money supply, measured as M2, is about $9 trillion right now. So that would more than double the money supply, and that sounds like inflation. Of course, the classic definition of inflation is the increase in the money supply beyond the increase in the growth of the economy. So let's just for a minute define what we mean by inflation. Let's take a few minutes then and talk about what Bernanke's doing with the current debt-based money system that we have
Right.
and inflation
All right.
on that.
Okay.
And then it'll probably take another video for us to get back to how the debt-free money system would work and why you think it could be done without inflation. Okay?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what inflation means to the man on the street. Inflation to the man on the street means prices are going up faster than my wages are going up. And I can't afford what I used to be able to afford. And I'm scared that I won't be able to buy food. That's not a classical definition of inflation, and the Fed, when it measures inflation, doesn't even measure food or energy, which is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. I think that actually, if we take that as the general indication of inflation, Pete, that's a very good indication of inflation. It basically means that for whatever you're contributing into the economy as your productiveness, now your wage or whatever it is, Pete. Okay, for whatever it is that you're getting compensated for is going to buy less. You know, so when we talk about the overall monetary policy objective of maintaining this stability in the buying power of the currency, okay, that's kind of the definition of non-inflationary. Okay, so we say that's the objective. How do we achieve it? By going through the process of reforming the money system. And in order to, I think, in order to understand that, in order to think about it in a way that's different from how we're doing it now, it's worth talking a little bit about how we're doing it now, Pete. Okay, and why, for instance, many noted pundits and commentators on economics and finance are saying that there's a portention out there of a hyperinflation. Let's take a look at, for instance, what the Federal Reserve's policies are right now with regard to meeting their mandate. Right now, the banks have, I think in my last reading, something like $1.2 trillion in reserves. Okay, which is probably about 10 times the amount of required reserves that they would have in order to have a sound banking system. So you could say right now the banking system is super sound, but in fact, those reserves were created by the Fed, by the Fed itself. So the Fed's trying to meet its policy goals of full employment and maintaining price stability. It's doing everything it can with regard to interest rates. That's its usual tool, Pete, okay, to control the money supply to make sure that inflation doesn't go up. Have enough money in the economy, use interest rates to make sure there's not too much money, either raising them or lowering them, so that you can control the money supply, so that what? So that you can keep people employed without inflation. That's the game, Pete. That's the name of the national economic game right there. Keep everybody employed without inflation. So what they're doing is they're creating excess reserves, but they're not creating any employment. Okay? So you have to say to yourself, isn't that the mark of a failed system? And it is. It is the mark of a failed system. Because if you can't reduce interest rates any further, and you can't, you're on the floor. And if you can't pump excess reserves into the system in a way that enables growth of wages and growth of demand in the economy so that people can be employed, what do you really have? You know, if you read the latest speeches by the Fed governors, Pete, their mark of success is the impact that their QE2 policy is having on the price of government securities. And that's not their mandate. You know, their mandate is full employment and maintaining general price stability. So we have to have a new system. This system cannot meet the mandate that we need. So we say to ourselves, well, what the options are? What our option is the money system that's outlined in the Kucinich bill. How is that going to be different from the system that we have now? And why would we think that it is not going to be inflationary? Now, one of my answers that I want to throw out there, Pete, is this fact, okay, that the switch to a debt-free at issue government public permanent money system has been macroeconomically modeled from a monetary policy basis by Dr. Karu Yamaguchi, and including, Pete, in Dr. Yamaguchi's modeling is the paying off of the government debt when it comes due. And the result of his modeling shows non-inflationary trends, especially over the long term. What about the transition period? Because of the fact that we have collapsed the term horizon, we keep issuing shorter and shorter and shorter terms. Those 28 days facilities, they're still turning them over, Pete. They're still renewing them on an ongoing basis. And that has to be dealt with. But we're not going to deal with it in the way that the Federal Reserve is dealing with monetary policy right now. We're going to deal with it within the structure that's been created with the Kucinich Act in place. Everybody says, well, if you take $1 trillion, if you put $1 trillion of new money into the economy, that has to be inflationary. Okay? And the answer to that is it does not have to be inflationary at all. It would not be inflationary at all. And it is not inflationary at all. And the evidence of that can be seen just by looking at the government's budget. Okay? The government's budget is in deficit for this year, $1.5 trillion is the forecast. $1.5 trillion. Now, we are going to get goods and services for every dollar that we spend. So how can it be inflationary? I guess in a way that would be my basic premise that I would work from.
Joe, we're about out of time now. We'll do another video next week on the mechanics of how we see the federal debt being paid off
after it's in place. Yep.
All right. Talk to you next week.
Thanks, Pete.